everyone to Massey College, and welcome to the Massey Dialogue on Navigating China-Canada Relations. My name is Jonathan Rose. I'm the acting principal of Massey College, and it's great to have everyone come here. Let me begin by giving a land acknowledgement. Massey College is built on land where many Indigenous peoples have lived. It is on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Crescent First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege that we have to work on this land. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ariel Benjamin Katz, who will take everything away.
Thank you. My name is Ariel Benjamin Kent. Thank you so much for joining all of us here today. I have the honor of being the co-lead of the Toronto chapter of the Canada-China Foundation.
And my name is Andrew. I'm a U of T alumnus, and I'm also another co-lead of the Canada-China Forum's Toronto chapter.
I would like to start by taking a moment to acknowledge and thank our venue hosts today. So Massey College, thank you very much. And their outstanding team, who include Alyssa Ginsberg and Sarah Baum, as well as Dongwoo Kim, who is a co-founder of the Canada-China Forum and a junior fellow here, without whom this could not have happened. So we're very grateful. And we're very appreciative for the support of the Asian Institute at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. The Canada-China Forum, so the CCF, we're a pan-Canadian organization and a network of young Canadian professionals. So we foster the next generation of Canadian leaders who are globally minded and, most importantly, China competent. We explore the dynamics of the Canada-China relationship, and we develop our own members' China competencies through cross-cultural and I would say, industry dialogues. And all of this is done in service and with the goal of serving Canada's national interests. The CCF, I would say, proudly encompasses over 100 emerging leaders across really every sector you can imagine, whether that's public, private, or everything else. And this is really from coast to coast and abroad, and we're very lucky to be supported by over 24 outstanding advisory members. So through our organization and our programming, we host discussions, workshops, and events like this, virtual and increasingly, luckily, in person. So the CCF and Darren, our CEO and founder, started 3 years ago virtually during the pandemic. And today we're very proud to have chapters all throughout the country in all of our major hubs. As conveners, Darren as our leader, and all of us in return, we create space for young emerging leaders to engage and think critically about China and about the Canada-China bilateral relationship and what that means for our current world and what we'd like things to look like in the future. We understand that part of fostering China competency is instilling the notion of nuance and complex within the Canada-China relationship. Even from a base level, if you think about China with 1.4 billion people versus Canada's 40 million, I do remember my first year in China where I had the privilege to visit a city whose entire population was the size of Canada. So it's especially incredible to be able to bridge those gaps of understanding and really meet on common ground. So with that being said, we can't entirely live by, China's hiding their strength, biding your time. We are seeing a lot of development and a lot of nuance and a lot of exploratory action. And we think it's important that we recognize China as a global player, and Canada's reckoning with that. As our Indo-Pacific strategy states, China's an increasingly disruptive global power. And this acknowledges that our approach is an evolving one. We are constantly looking for new perspectives, new ideas, and we are constantly growing our understanding of the Canada-China relationship. So, I have had the extreme privilege of living and learning and working in China, as many of you have. And so I know I'm not alone in saying that this is a very critical moment in understanding the relationship between these two countries, how they engage with one another, and how they engage with the world and our future.
Thank you, Ariel. So let me allow me to briefly introduce the agenda for today. We'll begin with a fireside chat led by Darren with our esteemed guest Henry Liu. That will be followed by a panel discussion moderated by myself. And then please do stay in the room, in this very same room, for a reception that will follow. After the panel discussion, you might see chairs being moved around by our staff. That is not a sign that we are kicking you out of the room. Don't be alarmed. It is just to make space for our reception. And I do want to mention that we will have a Q&A between the panel discussion and before the reception. So now, without further ado, let me pass it on to Darren to introduce himself and our first speaker.
Amazing. Thank you, Ariel and Andrew. It's a great pleasure to introduce Henry Liu here. Since 2011, Henry has served as the Vice President of Power Corporation, overseeing the company's business development in Asia, where the company currently has a number of investments. He has been with the company for almost 30 years, starting in 1995. And prior to joining PowerCore, Henry worked with China's CITC Group in Beijing, known as China's biggest state-run conglomerate with one of the largest pool of foreign investments and assets in the world. He obtained his Bachelor of Arts in Nanjing, China, and earned an MBA from McGill University, and is also a CFA charter holder in this case. Now, Henry, I'm delighted to have you join us today and to sit here at a time where in the world there's a lot of anxiety, whether it's what's happening abroad, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Asia even, and especially in Canada where we're feeling kind of the cost of living, inflation, myself, the cost of purchasing a home. So there's just a lot of anxiety. And whether for good or for bad, China is always in the discourse in one way or another. You can weave in all these issues China through those threads. Now, for the last 30 years, you've had a front row seat to China's development. From its economic miracle to the surge of the middle class to today's even kind of this economic slowdown where growth is at 4.5% in 2024. Political, social change, overall, you've seen China transform. What have you learned from China, from your experiences over the year? And how can we apply those insights into the China of 2024 and beyond?
Well, thank you, Darren. This is a great pleasure to be here to join you at the Canada-China Forum and have a discussion with all interested audience on the relationship between Canada and China. I think you're right. You know, China has evolved tremendously over the past 40 years, and today it has created a lot of, I would say, as you describe, anxieties and concerns about the emergence of this superpower. I look at it, and my view is that a lot of people are concerned or worried, and not because they understand about China. It's because they don't understand what China is. So I think when you don't understand something, it's big, it's humongous, it's coming up, you kind of taking a step back and say, whoa, what's going on? So I think it's very useful for people really to step back and take a look at the history about where China came from and what they have been doing in the past years and how they were doing that, and then eventually try to develop a sort of trajectory. And try to see where it's going forward, and I think one of the very useful thing also for people to understand about China is really look at the history as well, not just the past 40 years, also the history of China. Back in the Ming, years. Yeah, not that far, it's but look at the Ming dynasties, the Tang dynasties, and Qing dynasties, and try to understand China and its role in the world during that time. So I think that will be helpful, and for us, we have been involved. Power Corp has been involved in China for close to 40 plus years actually. We first set it up, established Canada-China Business Council back in 1978 when China first started its open and reform policy. I think, at that time, China was right out of the Cultural Revolution. The economy is, in bad shape, and political governance is very murky and very opaque. So people don't have a lot of knowledge about what China is and where China is going. So we're, probably at a better stance when it compares to back in '78. But I think, luckily, at that time, a group of Canadians, entrepreneurs, went to China, led by the late Paul Emery Sr., Mr. Paul Emery Sr. And they went to China with very open mind and very empathetic, attitude, and very respectful attitude. And they learned about what China is and what China want to do. And even the Chinese are trying to figure out what they have to do, with reform and open policy. So they send a lot of people all over the world try to learn what the experiences of other economies, from the, Japan, from Korea, from all the, we call it the little four dragons of Asian, and also from the States, from Canada, from Europe. I think at that time, China is very open to learning as well, and the world is looking at China and saying, you want to learn? We're here to teach. And I think for me, I joined Power Corp in '95, and when I first met with the group from Canada, Power Corp group from Canada, it struck me that the Canadian group, Canadian people, compared to other Western people, has a very unique character, which is empathetic and respectful. It's not assertive. It's not forceful. It's not saying, condescending and say, this is what you need to do. They always try to understand what you mean, where you come from, what you want to do, and we provide support to you. So this is very important in the dialogues, in the negotiations, and trying to meet the other side, the counterpart in the middle. And I think that's one of the Canada's very strong value. At least at that time, what I feel about Canada.
I think the relationship Power Corp has with China is very special. I don't think there's any other Canadian company that has 40 years of fiber and history, not only with doing trade and business, but really embedding that bilateral relationship as well, right? Power Corp is a considerable force. You have 3.1 trillion assets under administration, according to your last year report. And I believe in China, it's more than $1 billion of investments here. The Chinese economy market right now isn't the greatest. Like, last year, China's real estate market's kind of wearing itself. There's slow growth, high youth unemployment. But one of your companies, IGM Financial Wealth Management, increased its equity in China AMC, which is another Chinese asset management, which in a way illustrates a sense of confidence in the Chinese market, right? So many would raise a red flag against everything I just mentioned there. Can you just explain as to why Power Corp has reinforced its position in China in this case?
I have to correct you later on that. I think when you talk about where the IGM has acquired more stakes in China AMC, which is one of the largest asset managers in China, is actually not additional acquisition. It's more of internal sort of optimization of the investment holding, because part of the holding they bought is from the parent company, so it's more restructuring for optimization, and we haven't, changed much. And so I wouldn't characterize that itself as a vote of confidence. But I would say this: China has been very important for Power Corp over the years, and we have, we are very closely, we monitor the country very closely, and we learn about country very closely. I think one way that why we think, we're still comfortable to have that, allocation in China with the assets and investment in China, and believe that, it's a country and economy, it will continue to evolve, is because over the past 40 years, we look at China, I said before, how they deal with their problems. And it's amazing for us to see the capability of this country is able to organize itself and to collect all the information about the country as a whole, and try to make a judgment of what are the priorities that the country has to deal with, both economically and socially and globally. And with that, they are able to formulate a policy every 5 years, and implement those policies, and to achieve results. And to me, any country that can do that over a period of 40 years is remarkable, and their capability, able to control the process is quite remarkable. And that actually, we always try to see, their leadership changes over time. We've been through like 4 or 5 leadership levels. What we see is that, the methodologies that they use with their 5-year plans is still very, very strong, very intact. They're able to, find issues within their economy, find issues within their system, and try to correct that and develop that. And I think, back 10 years ago when Xi Jinping first came into leadership power, we had an assessment. At least I had an assessment and made a presentation to our board about the leadership transition. At that time, I was telling people, I said, Xi Jinping is having a different task in China. When Deng Xiaoping started reform, it's focusing on economic reform. So the only thing the whole country is focused on is economy. Nobody talks about environment. Nobody talks about social, welfare. Nobody talks about, fairness. It's all economy. So everything goes. I think after 30 years of that, economy has went to a level that is, hitting a lot of, structural issues and environment issues, social fairness, And Xi Jinping, when it comes to power, he's facing a daunting task of not just building economy, but building a country. So when you have to face a responsibility of building a country rather than just economy, it's a lot different. There's a lot of different dimensions you have to look at. And I think he's done a pretty remarkable job in dealing with that, So that's why when I'm looking at it and say, they have a way of doing things, and I think, they will probably continue to use the same methodology, continue, and be successful. That's where I think at least my confidence comes from, and my comfort level will come from.
I think President Xi has a very hard task ahead of him, as you mentioned, a daunting task. And I think no leader would ever want to be in his shoes there. Now, many of our global counterparts here, we're seeing a buzz of government-to-government activity between Beijing, other capitals, at the government-to-government level, whether it's the United States, Secretary of State Blinken has visited, the Treasury Secretary has visited, France, President Xi was just recently in France for a state visit, and even the European Union. Now, in Canada here, Minister Jolie has talked about pragmatic diplomacy. It's the name of the game for us now. The government has made it very clear we will engage if it's in our national interest to do so. We will not be swept up in kind of this fear of missing out, this FOMO kind of attitude here. Now, to get the relationship back on track, both sides there needs to be a willingness on both sides here. So what can Ottawa do, being the first question? And the second, what can Beijing do as well? Because it's going to be a really awkward dance if one chooses to dance and the other chooses to not to.
I'm from business, so I shouldn't comment too much about politics and everything. But here's what I believe, that a good relationship between the two countries really helps business to develop, and I think from our perspective, we really have a fundamental belief that the prosperity of China will bring prosperity for the world. So everyone should be able to share with that, and I think that's a basic fundamental kind of connotation that we have, or at least some of the people that we're working on China has, and we want to make sure that Canadians as a society will be able to recognize that, and will really understand what it means when we are working with a successful China, and we believe that I believe that China's is trying to play a responsible role as a global player, and I think the world has evolved, and we do have a lot of challenges in the world, and every government is trying to figure out what that new order of the world should be. I think China is very open to China is a benefactor, not benefactor. China is benefited tremendously from the old world order, but it also sees some of the I would say some of the shortcomings of those old structure, and try to help to development, and also try to help some of the players accountable for being participant of the world order. I think that's what China is trying to do, in my view, and with regard to the relationship between the two countries, I think China is, from what I talked to some of the people there in China, including the business, including the government, including the people on the street, I think we have a very open and Chinese have very open and friendly attitude toward Canada, towards Canadian people, towards Canadian commodities, goods, towards Canadian values. So I don't really see a big issue there from here. But I think from here, I think when you read the Indo-Pacific strategies, I think one of the things that strikes me is that I applaud our government. It's recognizing that we have limited understanding about what China is, and that's a deficit of knowledge on our side. Now we have to catch up, and I think coming back to where we started, back 40 years, with a group of business, and going to China and not knowing what China is, I think we've been very good. We did very well with our empathetic attitude and respectful attitude, and that carries us for a long time. So I think this is the same approach. This is a Canadian core value for us, to be empathetic and respectful, and that will carry us for a long time as well in the relationship.
And I would agree. I think the point of competencies, it's great to see that the government is really trying to shore that up inside government. But the forum, the Canada-China forum, we're really trying to shore that up across the country amongst all young Canadians. What we try to say is we should know China as we know the United States. That's how much we should know China in this case. Just in terms of, as a business leader, what are the opportunities you see in China for Canada?
Well, I think there are obviously a lot of opportunities. First of all, the two economies has a huge complementarities with each other, and the Canada-China Business Council has done the report on that, complementarities between the two countries. So we have, lot of natural resources. We have quality products, and China has huge market with good, huge population. So that's a natural match between Canada and China. We don't have issues. We don't have competition. We don't have to compete for technologies. We don't have to compete for anything. And also on the sustainability side, I think China is the biggest polluter in the world, and it pollutes for the rest of the world, right? They make products and export to all the countries, and Canada has a lot of technologies and a lot of researches in clean tech. So on that side, I think there's a huge potential for us to work together, and also I think China with its manufacturing capacities, they can help Canadian industrial value chain to upgrade and to put in more advanced manufacturing capacities to help improve competitiveness of Canada in the global market. I think there are huge potentials for us on a number of sides.
And there's definitely a need to shore up our Canadian competitiveness, but also productivity as well.
Yeah.
Now, we're almost at time here. My last question is, as an organization, we're focused on fostering the next generation of Canadian leaders who are going to be globally minded and China competent. What is your advice for this next generation when engaging with China?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. I think one of the, I had a small scholarship. I worked with a group of Chinese in Montreal and in Quebec, and established a scholarship foundation for the Chinese students. And we interview our recipients of the award. And one student strikes me, and I was scared. She was saying, I like to work with like-minded people. It strikes me that, if you don't really know the world and you're stuck with like-minded people, that's a recipe for ignorance and stupidity. So I would not recommend people just work with like-minded people. Be empathetic, be open-minded, and be respectful. I think that's the only thing that I hope our young people will be able to have that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time, Henry. And I'll turn it over to my colleague Andrew here for the panel discussion next. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
May I now introduce our four esteemed panelists tonight. From my right-hand side to the left, we have first Dr. Elena Caprioni. She is a program director of the Asian Business Management Program at York University. Dr. Caprioni holds a PhD in Chinese modern and contemporary history and international relations. With experience spanning 3 continents, she has conducted postdoctoral fieldwork on Uyghur-Han relations and research foreign direct investment, FDI, in China's mining sector. Her previous work includes roles as academic director of the Peking University program at the Council of International Education Exchange and resident director of the Minzu University of China program. Next, on my right-hand side, we have Professor Jeremy Peltier at the Department of Political Science at Carleton University. Professor Peltier researches the politics, government, and foreign policies of Asia, particularly China and Japan, as well as development politics and Canada-China relations. Professor Peltier was educated at the University of Toronto, right here where we are, as well as PKU and a PhD from UC Berkeley. Professor Peltier brings to us a wealth of China-focused understanding of contemporary Asian affairs. Now, to my immediate left-hand side, we have Professor Emeritus Victor Falkenheim of U of T's Department of Political Science and East Asian Studies, as well as Victoria College. Professor Falkenheim leads a course of the Pearson stream of the WIC-1 Foundation program at Victoria College, focused on the democratic transformation of East Asia. Over the past 40 years, and Professor Falkenheim has been teaching at University of Toronto since 1972. He is a long-serving authority on contemporary Chinese politics, migration, and urbanization, and has worked on numerous projects with CIDA, which is the Canadian International Development Assistance Program, and World Bank projects on China. And finally, we have Professor Howard Lin, who is the director of the Canada-China Institute for Business and Development, and professor of global management studies at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. Professor Lin is also a former faculty member at Pennsylvania State University's Graduate School and a founder of the Center for the Study of Canada-Asia Business at Odette School of Business, University of Windsor. Professor Lin is the former chair of the Academy of International Business Canada chapter and currently serves as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Okay, now I'm sure you're all waiting for the formal questions and discussions. So without further ado, Canada-China relations this year have been clouded by several events, such as Canada's public inquiry into foreign interference, which recently released its interim report noting that interference from abroad, namely China, has indeed undermined Canada's public confidence in Canadian democracy. And then down south, I'm sure all of you have heard about or read about US's TikTok ban, and US President Joe Biden has recently signed a ban into law. And in fact, Canadian media has revealed that a national security review was conducted in Canada last year of the app TikTok. So with that in mind, for our panelists, and any of you can begin, can answer this question, what is the current state of Canada-China relations, and how would the relations evolve moving forward given these domestic and international pressures?
I'll start maybe, and I'll be frank. We have the worst relationship with China of any of the G7 countries, by far. We've had, President Xi Jinping has never been to Canada since assuming office. We have not had a prime minister visit from China since 2016. Our prime minister last visited China in 2017. Yeah, our prime minister visited China last in 2017. Since the only minister who has visited China since COVID has been our environment minister last summer. And we have not had an exchange of foreign minister visits now in 5 years. So that's the state of the relationship. You can compare it, for example, to other G7 countries. President Xi Jinping has just been in France. Chancellor Scholz was just in China. So this is the state of affairs. It is a very sobering one. I can share with you that the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs just visited China, exploring a ministerial visit, and that is now not happening. So, and the reason is very simple, that they could not find anything that would be delivered by that visit. So in a sense, what we're saying is not only is our relationship frozen, but there's nothing on the table. And that, of course, weakens Canada's hand internationally. You have the world's largest trading nation, the world's second largest power, and our relationship with it is essentially in deep freeze. And the atmosphere in Canada, no, but basically in Canada since the 3M affair, since the arrest of the two Michaels, has been a collapse in trust. And nothing has happened since then to be able to rebuild trust. Until that happens, probably we won't have much progress. But unfortunately, the signs are mostly of a continued deterioration of trust. I mean, interesting enough, I don't know for a fact, but as I understand it, after the issuing of the Indo-Pacific strategy in November, almost December of 2022, there was actually a feeling that Minister Joly did want to re-engage with China and was exploring a visit already in January 2023. At exact that moment came the leaks about foreign interference. Right then. I suspect it was sabotage, but and so you know, of course, I don't have the proof, but the point is that now the China story in Canada is dominated by the foreign interference suggestion, and I've read the Hogue report carefully from beginning to end, and I'm not saying that China is a benign actor in this, but the evidence is really thin. And also the atmosphere built around that. And some of it is, you know, we talked about China knowledge, kind of misconceptions are being abandoned. But I'm not saying that China is a benign actor. It is, this is take it carefully. But there is very little to support the notion that the Justice Hogue said quite forthrightly that China made no difference to the outcome of the election, but there is very little to support the allegation, except what's coming from intelligence agency, that China is the most important malign actor interfering in Canadian elections. There's not very much in there. But nonetheless, that's the story that we're reading, and that's the story going forward. So that's the state of affairs. I wish I had a better story to tell. And I would say, again, and the reason why I raised the issue of the foreign interference allegations and the timing of it is because the Indo-Pacific strategy was actually quite carefully written, not to preclude engagement with China. I mean, even though China was... Now, Minister Joly, for example, was the one who insisted that China be named in the report, and it was not named in a favorable light, but nonetheless, actually, if it had not been named as the global affairs staff wanted to do, it might have been even worse, because there was, if you read it carefully, there is room left for engagement, but the atmosphere for engagement has been missing. So I'll stop there because I think that gives you the story that you need to know.
I'd like to add a comment to this. So from the political aspect, we know the situation is not good. It's very tense. And then Jeremy talked about the IPS. And then in the IPS, we often talk about the people-to-people linkage. So now my experience is really to talk with, to deal with students, executives, government officials from China on a daily basis. So these connections still happen today. They're still there. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel in the sense that there is still connections people to people. We still receive delegations, we still receive requests from Chinese students to come here or from Chinese government officials to have connections with Canada. Obviously, the numbers of requests decrease, but there is still that kind of request, people to people. However, the biggest challenge that we are facing is that there are too many issues around visa, and the flight cost is extremely expensive. So that creates two huge obstacles to this kind of linkage. People who still would like to come, but cannot, once they see that it gets very difficult to come because of visa or because of flight cost, they just turn around and they prefer to go to Australia or prefer to go to the United Kingdom, for example.
Right. Thank you, Professor Pautial, for giving our audience deeper insights into the foreign interference interim report. And Dr. Caprioni, the human connection is a topic that I wish to discuss a little further into our discussion if we have more time. Now, moving on to this side, Professor Falkenheim and Professor Lin. Would you like to add some to this question?
Well, I guess just to follow up on the question of where the political will might be mustered to make a change in this relationship. And it has to be, at the level of senior government. And given political polarization, and the likelihood of a conservative, at least minority government, if not majority government, in the relatively immediate future, it seems to me there's no real possibility of an initiative to change at the top, and I think that's a central prerequisite for for moving beyond this frozen relationship.
Hi. Yeah. So at Ryerson, we conducted several seminars between, I think, 2019 and 2022. So I noticed at the beginning, so there seems kind of a balanced discussion. People still talk about value versus interest. Today, senior government circle, there's no such thing. When they talk about interest, they talk about how to leverage Canadian interest in other areas. So 2018, the government talked about diversification, but when they talk about a diversified business to China. Today, this Indo-Pacific policy with diverse, actually the essence is diverse from China, right? Yeah, but I want to say, because I'm in business, right? It's not all that bad. 2021, 2022, actually our trade with China hit record high. Yeah. Also in the investment area. So up to recently, there's still Chinese investors want to come to our mining industry. So that led the government try to figure out something else. More the measures to scrutinize the so-called national security interests. So I just wonder why there's a separation between politics actually from the real business. Is really the interdependency. So if you look the trade, our trade used to be depending on China on consumer good, but recent years, our import from China, a large share is in capital goods, intermediate goods. So China is not just a trader, is not just a manufacturer, is our supply chain partner. So this interdependency is kind of a past dependency. So even the government, I don't think the government has done much to either support or try to push back China. It just shows that the economy has its own mechanism, right? So I think Mr. Liu's, this is a large company, right? But Canada, our business carry out largely by small business. I think they have a less kind of political pressure, exposure. So the economic logic make them to continue trading with China. So even, I think we talk about public opinion. It looks like Canadian losing trust in China. I think there's a difference in terms of risk perception. I do think Chinese business still trust in Canadian system, so they still want to come. So you talk about 2024 political side. There's not much hope, but I think the business will continue at least in this year, unless we have a sanction, things like that. So this is a little bit bright light.
Thank you, Professor Elena and Professor Falkenheim. Now, I'd like to delve a little deeper into a point that Professor Falkenheim has mentioned, which is our looming Canadian federal election, which will take place in 2025, the latest. And according to our current statistics, it is likely that the Conservatives will form a power, whether majority or minority. Now, the question is, what would that mean for Canada-China relations going forward compared with the possibility of the Liberals maintaining the status quo and holding on to power? And perhaps we can start from this side, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I don't think there will be much change from the business side, because remember, the Canada-China bilateral investment treaty is signed in the conservative time, 2014. So, practically, we talk about the western provinces, right? Agriculture, mining, they still need China to progress. The professor said that we're at the lowers the point. How low can we be? Unless there's a real war. I hope there's no such thing. Not worry from business side. Yeah, I just want to mention that you mentioned the CCBC, right? You watch their membership keep growing these years. So the business community is still interested in China, doing business with China. So we have a saying that when you're in trade, you're not in the war. So I hope So the 2022, the government tried to force the Chinese investor divest from 3 largest mining company. So it didn't happen because the community, the business community, the mining company, do not think that's wise strategy. So.
Well, I have no crystal ball here, but looking at developments in the United States, where the only thing the Democrats and Republicans can agree upon is the nature of the sort of Chinese threat, and I think in Canada, we will likely sort of encounter the same dynamic, that both parties now, I think, are agreed, that China poses a significant security threat, as well as as well as a political threat, I suppose, and so I don't. Even should the Liberals improbably triumph, I wouldn't expect any improvement in relations coming from the top.
Actually, I think things can get worse. I mean, there are things already in the Conservative platform that will happen if the Conservatives come. Canada will leave the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That's already in the platform. I can't see them backing off that, even though it makes no sense whatsoever. But so, at least on certain areas, things will get worse. The other aspect of it, yes, it's true that our exports increased in 21, 22. In fact, I think 23 was the best year ever. But those are all low value added exports, agriculture, commodities. In terms of mining and community, I mean, there's already more talk about restrictions on investment in mining because of the critical mineral strategy. And we shouldn't forget that President Biden imposed new tariffs yesterday. And those tariffs, by the way, are not directed at industries where China already has a surge of imports into the United States. These are industries, they are anticipating surges of it. So practical banning of semiconductor imports, 100% tax on EVs, tariffs on EVs. And the problem is that we are tied into American value chains. And which means that, practically speaking, in higher value added areas, and since we have no tier 1 companies, higher value added areas, we're going to have to actually keep divesting from in a higher value add in order to maintain our access to the US market. That's a sobering thought. So that we will continue to trade in China in commodities. But even our imports of higher value added goods from China will be restricted by some of these questions, especially those intermediate goods, which could simply be subjected to US bans. And so I think that's more likely. Now the interesting thing is a lot of it's not just commodities. The other area of export, this may be one area which the Conservatives possibly would keep pushing, is energy exports. Some of it processed in much of it processed in the United States, but we have a pipeline for sale. I doubt if we will be allowed to welcome Chinese investment in it, even if they could work out the First Nations issues involved in it. So I think that things can get worse. And one of the interesting takeaways from the Hogue report, if you read about it, is complaints of the Conservative Party that they were affected, and of the particular leader because of talk on WeChat. If you read the report carefully, where that talk of WeChat came from, was citing a Global Times report, which cited a Hill Times report on the Conservative Party platform, which already was somebody speculating exactly this question: what more can they do? And lays a couple of things. So that then becomes repeated in the Global Times article, where the Global Times article gets cited in WeChat, and that's considered interference in the Canadian election crisis. Read the report, it's all there. So, I think things will get worse.
Well, it's hard to predict. Remember, in 2016, we were all so excited because Xiao Tudou was elected. And remember, everybody in China was excited. We were here, we received more than 300 government officials coming to Canada, because they want to create connections with Canadians, because everybody had so many hopes. And look at what happened.
Yeah, so it
So
could be
let's
Nixon going to China. Poilievre goes to China.
So, I don't know, but regardless who wins or what happened, I think that something that we should remind our politicians is that China is there. We cannot avoid China. One key thing that Canada really cares about is climate change. And then that's probably... theoretically. So probably at least that's only the dialogue open between Canada and China right now. And probably we should insist there and try to keep a constructive conversation on that topic. Because right now we keep talking, we should engage with China, but nothing is happening, as we mentioned, they are not deliverable. So let's focus on something that we have concrete things to bring to the table, and let's rebuild this construction there, regardless, liberals or conservatives.
Let me take you up on that, because actually there are some things going on, but it's mostly at the multilateral level.
Sorry, could you speak into the mic?
Yeah, so there are things going on, mostly at the multilateral level, and that's the area which the government continues to maintain dialogue on. The problem here, again, under a conservative government, they care less about the multilateral, and they care less about some of the particular issues, especially climate change, biodiversity. The areas of most intense engagement has been over the biodiversity treaty. and where has been some cooperation. So there is areas, and at the multilateral level, we are doing as much as we can, and we will continue to do it if the direction from the top is there.
Thank you. Now, a key theme of our discussion so far has been uncertainty, right? And Professor Pautial mentioned Chinese investments into Canada's mining sector, and I believe Dr. Caprioni, you've done some research in this area. So, amidst this uncertainty and whatever direction our Canada-China relations will go towards, the question is from a business perspective, how can businesses navigate these trends and uncertainties when considering investments and trade with China? And maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Caprioni.
I don't know. It's very difficult right now with all of the regulations around, all of the mistrust around from both sides, I will say. I'd like to bring something a little bit different to your questions, which is part of business, but more focused to the environment where I work, which is education business, education service around business. Up to now, we saw that there is a lot of investment in education coming from China to Canada, at least until a few months ago. We had a lot of international students. We had a lot, and there is so much money moving around that. And there is a lot of, we are able to attract a lot of Chinese students coming here. And that brings tons of business. But what we notice is that I don't see the same exchange. And that's something that actually I'd like to younger people like you. How come the Canadian young students are not interested so much into going to China? Because if we really want to create connections between these two countries, also to a business level, we need to create knowledge, that we need to start from education. If we don't have this kind of exchange, we just create barrier, we just create prejudices, because we don't know what's on the other side. So regarding to business, regarding to your questions, I think that education is still there, even if there are a lot of regulations. But what I see is that it's only on one side. I don't see that kind of exchange from our side. So it's a kind of a question that we should ask ourselves as Canadians.
Yeah, I remember as a UFT alumnus, I remember reading a statistic about how we have a lot of scholarships for international exchanges, but actually a very low percentage of our student population actually utilize these opportunities, whether to go to China or to other countries abroad. So definitely some food for thought. I'd like to give Professor Lin a chance to respond to this question about how can businesses navigate the uncertainties in Canada-China relations.
Yes, so normally when we talk about a joint venture, right? So we partner and select the industry. You remember I think in 2018, the Liberal government, the senior circle talk about the free trade agreement. Say, people criticize it that there's so much uncertainty, right? So people talk about a sectoral agreement. So, at least in some of the non-high-tech industry, those are including education, right? It should be emphasized. But unfortunately, I mentioned the small business in Canada. We are known to be risk averse. So I think the government is responsible to reduce that uncertainty. Right? Yeah, just give signal, just a warning. So that's so the small business is still in the game. But if they hear more these warnings, so that uncertainty will not go away, but only increase. We're growing. So I can, yeah, they said that, they said there's some low entry mode, right? Instead of wholly owned subsidiary, you go to joint venture. Instead of making a tangible investment, you try to be asset light, do just on the service side. Yeah, so don't leave things there on the ground in case there's one day the government said there's no business in China. So this is just temporary. Yeah, I think the government is responsible. If they really mean business, they said this delegation, March, the parliamentary delegation go there, they emphasize we're here for business. If they really here for business, so there should be some uncertainty, assurance for the business, for small business. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Lin. So we only have a few minutes left, so I'd like to give either Professor Falkenheim or Professor Peltiel a chance to either respond to this question, add some insights, or to share some concluding remarks to our attendees.
Okay, well, a couple of thoughts. I mean, one, following on Dr. Caprioni's remarks, I think over decades of collaborative work between sort of Canadians and Chinese over this very long period, there are unbreakable ties. There are networks that have been established that constitute a kind of latent foundation for resuming cordial ties at some later point in the future. So I'm hopeful and optimistic in the long run that this is a period that hopefully will not last, the frozen period, that it will be ignited in part from the grassroots at some point in the future. And then maybe just anecdotally, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've taught a freshman course, a first-year course called the China Challenge, and quite unexpectedly. And I provide them with, many of the allegations about sort of, China's malign behavior, and they don't buy it at all. This kind of younger generation are quite skeptical. In fact, they seem quite sympathetic to the notion, that an alternative center of global power, alternative to the United States, is emerging. And will play a positive role. So that to me is very interesting, but equally surprising counterintuitively. Many of the Chinese students who are in the course, as visa students, or first-generation students, are much less sanguine. They're much more critical of their country, and so you have something of an interesting disconnect. But speaking of Canadians, many of them are much more open to the possibility that China constitutes a force for positive change in the world, and that maybe is a foundation as well.
I'd like to bring it back to the question of academics and the universities. Over the last while, I've kept asking the same question to our officials. But we know what the red lights are. We know what the yellow lights are. Tell us about the green lights. And I've stopped asking that question. I think actually what we have to do is actually, with political will, establish some green lights. That's to say, that we should look at some areas of joint research between academic institutions, which will of basic research in common problems that will be protected by the government and can be scrutinized by our security agencies. Go ahead. We've identified this area. We want to have joint research. We will debrief the people who are involved. Let's do it, because if we cut off all the ties, of academic ties, then we will actually be ignorant, and the world will be poor because it also weakens the whole scientific research efforts. Now, so I do have this plea that we should actually sit down hard for academic leaders from the places where people had created joint research in the past. Now, the government tells us, there's another interesting thing. You know, well, social science is open. Yeah, social science is open from our side. But in China, social science is not open. There was recently a report on political science in China, in which the leading political scientist, my boss at Tsinghua, Yan Xuetong, and the complaint about, it said that the atmosphere in China is now much more difficult for social science, for political science, and international relations research. So don't tell me social science is open. What we have to do is we have to have political will from both sides. We can go to Washington, get support. They say, we're going to have research in these areas, and we're going to do it right, and we're going to protect the scientists, whether they're of Chinese ethnic origin or not. And we're going to work together because we need to work together if we're ever going to get to a better world. That's where I'll stop.
Thank you. We are now at time. I'm sure there's a lot I want to get to. I'm sure our panelists have a lot more to share, but unfortunately we do have a time limit. So I would like to thank everyone for attending, both those of you who are able to make it here in person, and those of you who are going to watch our recording online later on. For those in the room, we do have a small time allocated for Q&A. Before I get to that, I would like to encourage everyone to check out Canada-China Forum. We have a website. We're active on social media platforms, LinkedIn. We do host discussion events like this one, or we host virtual and hybrid events. A lot of them are smaller scale, so you'll get a more intimate discussion with our panelists and more chance to ask questions, to engage in discussions. So with that in mind, thank you again. And this concludes our recorded portion of the event. And can I please ask Mr. Henry Liu to come back on stage for our Q&A session?